listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet. Britain's Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt has said that as many as 800,000 people are chronically lonely in the UK. And according to Age UK, 450,000 older people face Christmas alone this year. Has loneliness really become an epidemic here in the UK? To discuss this, I'm joined by Trevor Littleton, chairman and founder of Contact the Elderly, Lucy Baena, a 28-year-old writer who was housebound earlier this year for 4 months with chronic back pain, and Tony Lobel, a Christian Science practitioner and writer on spirituality and health, and an article about the glory of being alone. Dr. Rebecca Harris joins us on the telephone. She's a lecturer in psychology at the University of Bolton and specialises in the mental and physical effects of loneliness. And Mrs. Winifred Green is in Liverpool, who's 88 and has lived alone since her husband died 15 years ago. I think I'll start with you, Trevor Littleton. You say loneliness is a devastating problem in the UK and has a crippling effect on older people who endure it day in and day out.
That's right. When we started I started Contact the Elderly 48 years ago. I was a young bachelor in central London, and I was unaware of the scale of the problem until I went to see the welfare officer in Marylebone, decided to do something about it. And we discovered that there were over 6,000 people on the books who were living alone, and we were really appalled by that. We decided to do something by taking them out on a regular tea party event, one Sunday afternoon a month, and encourage friends to do so. So we get volunteers to come. It makes a huge difference to their lives, as well as the old people who are living within 4 bare walls with one cross on a calendar. And we look for drivers who can do this one Sunday afternoon a month, and hosts who have a warm heart, a large teapot and a downstairs loo to entertain the guests one Sunday a year or perhaps twice a year. And we have 6,700 dedicated volunteers throughout England, Scotland and Wales 48 years later. But we're merely scraping the surface of a huge problem. There are indeed, as Jeremy Hunt says, almost a million people who in this country were off the radar of social support and family and friendship support. And the solution, so far in our experience, is to get society galvanized to help them by volunteering or by friends and family to do something. But unfortunately, and this is for the others on the panel to say more about it, the reasons for that are because of the dysfunctional nature of families today, where children go abroad, or there are more aging people who are single, who have no friends or family, or who have outlived their friends or family, and who need this vital companionship link. Mother Teresa said that being alone and unwanted is the world's greatest disease, and she was at the sharp end of human suffering. And so that is the problem that society is facing. And only volunteers and family and friends can resolve it.
Winifred, hello?
Hello. Well, that sounds lovely, doesn't it? You know, taking people out in the car and everything. Isn't that marvellous?
You've heard the positive effect of what Trevor here does and what his campaign does. Would you mind just telling us what it's like for you?
Well, of course, we don't have anything like that, unfortunately. Not to take us out and about. We all we have is like a mobility bus that would take you if you wanted to go somewhere or visit somebody. As long as you phoned up 3 days before, they would take you there and pick you up and bring you back whatever time you wanted to go and come back. But as regards having the teapot and everything, gosh, that sounds marvellous.
Well, we'll be very happy to give you the nearest Contact the Elderly link. If you let us have your name, send it in to us. I'll be very happy to put you in touch with them so that you can have the benefit of it.
That would be great, yes.
Lucy Baena, you've experienced loneliness and coming to terms with admitting the loneliness. It's not just confined to people who are elderly, is it? Tell us a bit about your experience.
In my experience, loneliness is prevalent, I think, in our society, much wider than just in the elderly community. And it's a really difficult thing that I've only really been able to understand what that feeling I had was in the last sort of month or so. And I've been ill for the best part of a year. And I think that loneliness is an incredibly isolating emotion that affects your whole life, because especially loneliness doesn't just mean that you're on your own. Loneliness you can be surrounded by people and still be lonely. And I think that for younger people or people who perhaps have developed an illness, that the fact that they have people but they still feel on their own is a different aspect of loneliness, and a very challenging thing to come to terms with. I wasn't able to leave the house, and so you suddenly are very going from having lots of friends that you go out and see, you get on a bus, you drive the car, all these things that you take so for granted. You're suddenly reliant on other people to visit you and to make that step, and you are incredibly needy. And you realise that in our society, it's not the done thing to ask for help, to say to people, I can't come to you, you need to come to me. And to admit that you need people to visit you is a really difficult challenge that I feel that I'm not articulating it very well, because it is hard to say it, and I'm doing it because I hope that by trying to talk about it more, and not that I'm trying to make it belittling loneliness in older age. It's just that it does exist in other parts of society as well. And from my experience, it wasn't until I realised that part of what was going on in my illness was loneliness, the fact that every morning my husband left for work and then I was on my own the whole day. I would look forward to a phone call. Going to the doctor became an activity, something that I could say I'd done when he came home. And I felt awful that, as well as being worried about my illness, my husband would also think, gosh, I've got to, try and entertain her or find something for her to do. And I hope that more people talking about it, we will... And discussing it, we can move forward. I think that this conversation is really positive in itself.
Dr. Rebecca Harris, you specialise in the mental and the physical effects of loneliness. Having heard from Lucy there, this is obviously a very genuine feeling that people aren't talking about. And obviously this is something that you are working with, and especially with the transition of primary school children and the feelings of loneliness in senior school.
Yeah, it's a very real condition, and actually in our country I think it's something that is a bit taboo still to say that you're lonely. It's as if you're not coping in some way. But actually loneliness is a very real phenomenon to people, and it's designed to be a natural circumstance that we find ourselves in. And in fact, the feeling of loneliness activates areas in the brain that are associated with physical pain. So we feel pained when we're separated from people and we feel that we're not connecting with people. And just like it's already been said, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're isolated. It's just that you're not able to connect in the way that you need to with people and you feel lonely. And those feelings are supposed to enable us to connect with people and reduce those physical feelings of pain within us. But in today's modern society, that's incredibly difficult to do because geographically we're all quite separated, and with the increases in using social networking, that networking sites, that has a big impact on the way we do things. And certainly, yeah, you're right, I have done an awful lot of research looking at loneliness with children, and other researchers have been looking at this phenomenon for quite a while. And loneliness isn't something that just affects the elderly, it affects everybody, and it doesn't seem to matter whether you have some very positive and very good friendships in your life. You can be surrounded by people and still feel very lonely.
Tony Lobel, then, you wrote the article that we saw on the glory of being alone. Before we come to speak to Winifred again, having heard what everyone has to say here, why is loneliness such a taboo subject, and how can others find this glory in lonesome?
Well, I appreciate everything that everyone's shared, and I totally acknowledge that loneliness is a huge problem in this country, and it needs a solution. And I think to me, what Dr. Rebecca Harris shared is really helpful, that we recognise the mind-body connection, that actually these problems have an impact physically if they're in thought and if they're in one's experience. But I think I talked to a senior nurse recently who did her training about 50 years ago, and she pointed out that when she did her training, they were all trained to consider the mind, body, spirit aspects of the individual patient. And I think what we can all bring to our own experience is a bit more of the spirit, which is something, to some degree, we've lost the sort of usualness of having a spiritual awareness, a spiritual consciousness, in which sometimes it is very natural to be alone. Not for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm not recommending to anyone they be a hermit or even go into a monastery, but a lot of people perhaps have lost that sense of having a daily time just alone with themselves to feel a sense of inner peace before they go out to either connect or not connect with other people. And it's that deeper spiritual connection, I think, which could help a lot of people. I don't think you can mandate it through government or anything like that. I think it's obviously an individual choice. But certainly I've seen a lot of people who are seniors who've lost their husband, say, and have been grieving, or lost their wife and been grieving, who've had the same challenges as others, but when they've got this spiritual discipline and they're used to being alone and they're used to finding their connection, they can find their peace. And what has been great to me in my experience, and I have seen this for many others, is when that happens, it opens your eyes to possibilities that you'd somehow lost sight of. And one of those possibilities, I think, is exactly what Trevor was talking about. The desire to give can be the answer to loneliness for a lot of people. And the author, Isabel Allende, the Chilean author, has this sentence. She says, "It is in giving that I connect with others, with the world, and with the divine." And I think a lot of people find that through giving, it opens up that sense of receiving. Whereas sometimes when we're stuck with a problem, whether it's a physical problem or a mental problem or loneliness, we lose sight of the fact that there are opportunities for us to feel that sense of peace without needing it to come from someone else. And then it gives us inspiration and ideas how to actually change what we're doing in a way that might open up doors of opportunity we'd missed.
That sense of giving is obviously very pertinent as we approach Christmas in the UK. Winifred, you've heard here from everyone, and obviously Tony has the spiritual approach to it. But tell us the practicalities of what life is like in your home.
Well, you see, I find it's different from what everybody's been saying, because I couldn't walk, for one thing, so I couldn't go out and about. If I had been able to, I wouldn't have been lonely at all. But the idea of getting up in the same house and not seeing a soul of a morning and dinner time comes, lunchtime, tea time, night time, bedtime, and it's the same thing. And all you have got to do is either watch the television or listen to the radio. And not seeing, most of my neighbours have all died, so I never even seen one of my neighbours. I'm talking about a few years ago now. It's vastly different now. But that's what I call being lonely. If I had people phoning me up and I was surrounded by children I wouldn't feel lonely. It's being exactly on your own from morning till night, day after day, week after week, and month after month, year after year. That went on for quite a few years before I found I've got such a lot of friends now. I'm absolutely thrilled to bits, but the only thing is, as I say, I couldn't get around. And if I'd have been able to walk, I'd have been able to do all kinds of jobs in the house, because I loved doing all kinds. And I'd be on the go from morning till night. If I was on my own, it wouldn't have worried me in the least. But when you can't move and you can't go anywhere, then you're stuck.
Thank you, Winifred. I think Trevor Littleton, who's the chairman and founder of Contact the Elderly, would like to respond to that.
Yes, I would, Winifred. And I think one of the key things, hopefully you will be able to join the Contact the Elderly group and become part of one of our parties and the family atmosphere once a month. But one of the things we've found over the years is, and Tony is right to say this, is that older people do want to give something back. The people who we help are knitting for the volunteers, although we only insist on what we only have one rule, and that is that the outings take place every month, spontaneously, from the link between the volunteer and the old person they drive out to tea. A relationship is born. And at our recent AGM, we had 3,500 years of long service awards. Some of them had been with us 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, yes, and even more than 40 years as volunteers, because we only do a simple thing that continues. When I started it, I was asked whether we would do it. I was told, never let your old people down, must be your rule. The annual Charabang outing, where you take people out and then forget them, is sometimes worse than not doing anything. And an important thing is to continue it. So I thought, well, one Sunday afternoon a month is as much as people, and that's how it has been. But just to give you put some flesh on this question of the impact of providing a personal link. When we first started, we had a lady called Lillian Rossiter, who was an Irish lady whose legs were in irons. She was was a polio victim, and she hadn't been out for 6 months before she came on our first outing. Within another 6 months, she could walk up a flight of stairs, and that was an object lesson to me. At the end of the year, her Roman Catholic priest had persuaded her to go to Lourdes, and when she came back, we said, Lillian, what happened? What was the miracle? She said, the miracle was that I got up the stairs of the plane and I got off the plane. And that taught us that what we're doing is we're keeping people off the statutory services and out of hospital because we're giving them something. In the words of one elderly lady, at last I have something to live for, not just to look forward to.
The conversation naturally comes back to Lucy, who is admitted being lonely, but through essentially the chronic back pain that you were suffering, and that really resonates with what Winifred said. It's being stuck, physically stuck, yeah, which is as debilitating as the sense of loneliness itself. Yes,
I mean, I went from being able to get out and about and do all the things that Winifred is talking about being unable to do. I was also totally unable to do, which at only 27 was something that you don't expect at all, and was tremendously frightening and isolating, and doctors also saying things like, well, you're not going to be able to walk again, and things. And as those sorts of diagnoses progressed, I became more and more ill, because I was seeing less and less people, as well as having all these frightening things happening. And I'd like to just go to what Tony was saying about giving. And I have background of working in the third sector and doing lots of things with other people, and that was one of the things that I was unable to suddenly do, my kind of giving jobs, and I was desperate to find other things. And throughout this year and my slow recovery, one of the things that I have started to do, which has been a daily practice now, is to be grateful for every tiny moment that I do something independently. And at the end of every day, I say a gratitude list to myself. Now, some people might say that that's spiritual. I don't think it necessarily has to be, although I can see the links to that. And through being grateful, so I started off on things like, I am grateful that I'm sitting on this sofa. And I think that those little links, and then, so I started doing that. And then for me, the next major point that I count my recovery from is when I started using technology, like writing a blog and using Skype and different technology to communicate to people that I couldn't physically get to. And as soon as that started, I realised that there were other people who were in a similar situation, and it gave me, if not the health to be able to go and see other people, it started very slowly to give me some confidence to begin to look for places, the equivalent to Trevor's work and things that for my age group, that I could find communities that supported me, and I began to meet other people who had been in similar situations, and that transformed me. And I went from being unable to walk across the kitchen to walking to my local shops within about a week, once I started this gratitude practice and sort of embraced technology.
Dr. Harris, what would you like to input, having heard then the latest from Lucy there?
I think it's interesting that kind of the talk about being positive about the situation might be the beginnings of trying to find some solutions. And it's certainly interesting that it's been brought up about social networking sites as being, or using the internet as a source of connecting with the world, because actually there's a very negative thing in relation to loneliness about most of the research that's been conducted in that area shown that people are lonelier when they use the internet. But what hasn't kind of been shown as of yet, and which is something I'd like to pick up on over the next couple of years, is looking at when people are lonely when they start to go on the internet, do they improve, or are there certain conditions when you go and use the internet as a source of connecting with people that then you actually get some positivity and it changes your scenario? So it would be it's interesting hearing the comments from people about that being a source that's useful, as it has kind of in the research field at the moment. The research has been very negative, or the findings have been very negative, and have indicated that people are lonelier that use that forum, and it indicates to me this is something we need to look a lot more into.
Tony?
Yeah, actually, if I could come back to Dr. Harris first. It's interesting. I did find a survey that was done in the US just the other day. I mean, the survey wasn't done the other day. I found it the other day. But it did find a very specific case where social networking was positive. And it really is the case that Lucy is saying. I'll read you the conclusion. It said, social support from blog readers who associated with decreased loneliness social support from blog readers was associated with decreased loneliness and increased personal growth among bloggers who lacked support from family and friends. And this was looking at people who actually blog about their illnesses and things and find those support networks. So I can certainly send you that research. It's a kind of step in that direction, isn't it?
That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, and
I think it's interesting that it's looking at social support, and actually sometimes when we measure loneliness in research, we look at people being unhappy with their circumstances. So to measure when we measure loneliness and we look at it, we're looking at somebody that's not happy with their circumstances, and often it relates to the quality of the relationships they've got and feeling connected. So increasing somebody's levels of social support and feeling that you've got people that are similar to you and are experiencing similar things and want to help you would reduce people's levels of loneliness. So accessing the internet in that way and using it that way would be really useful to people who are lonely.
Trevor?
We've had various reports from elderly people who we help that the volunteers have helped them get online, and it's transformed their lives. A lot of them are very resistant to it, including a relation of mine, a very elderly lady who would not get on the internet. And eventually we persuaded her. Now she can't imagine what life was like without it, and it has really enriched her life and transformed it in many ways. So I
think that's really important. That I don't think for any of us social media should replace face-to-face relationships. No. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful to be sitting with someone talking or hugging and all those things. But they fill a gap between that and nothing, which is actually very constructive for a lot of people. And obviously, Dr. Harris will do the research and we'll find if the evidence supports that. But that's certainly been my experience, say, with some of my fellow church members. There's a wonderful woman in my church who's 95, and she just said, I think when she was about 85, well, if everyone's using the internet, I need to find out how it works.
It's a wonderful thing if young people will go in and help their old friends to do that.
Rebecca Harris, would you like a final word?
Yeah, I think I'd like to point out that there are people that aren't necessarily socially isolated, and they are surrounded by people but yet still feel lonely. And although that might be quite different to the type of loneliness we've been talking about, it certainly is very real. And we do meet people that just aren't connecting with people in the way that they need to connect. So the support and the quality of the relationships that they have is not what they desire and they need. And that may be a slightly different type of loneliness, but it certainly seems to be very real and apparent in our country right now.
Lucy?
I'd just like to say one final thing about social media and loneliness in bridging that gap that Tony talked about, in that I think when your loneliness happens to somebody, one of the things is that you lose a lot of confidence. And so for me, from my experience, that ability to use technology to slowly begin to kind of get back into social life and connecting to people gave me the confidence to reach out and then to help me get better, to be where I am now, like meeting strangers, doing this. And I think if social media and technology hadn't been around, who knows where I would be now. And I really hope that I can get involved with more schemes to help older people to access technology too.
I think that sounds like a great plan, Lucy. Final word from you, Tony.
Yeah, well, I think that idea that Lucy just shared about needing confidence, I mean, there are different ways to get it. And certainly in my own experience, my sense of confidence has come from a growing sense of the divine in my experience. And it's something I would wish on everyone, because I think it's something everyone has access to.
Sadly, we've run out of time, but I'd like to thank all my guests: Trevor Littleton, Chairman and Founder of Contact the Elderly; Lucy Baena, a writer who was housebound earlier this year; Tony Noble, Christian Science practitioner and writer on spirituality and health; Dr. Rebecca Harris, a lecturer in psychology at the University of Bolton, specialising in mental and the physical effects of loneliness; and Mrs. Winifred Green from Liverpool. Thank you for joining us.